Thanks for coming. Barb Allen's here to talk about good old Santa Claus.
Yeah.
And we hope you take from our refreshment stand. We've got homemade brownies, some chips, some oranges, some coffee. And we have Barb Allen talking about the aging of Santa Claus. Thank you.
And that's Damon for for those of you who are the Stockbridge contingent.
Assume everyone knows me.
Why is Damon famous?
Damon is the director here. Yes, of the Lee Library. Okay. Can you see this clearly, or should we turn out the light? How about turn out this? Yeah. Better? Okay. I'm going to sit for part of this, so I'm not blocking it. And, although I almost fell off the bench, anytime you would like, feel free to comment, ask questions, whatever appeals to you. And there are bunches of Santas here. Some of them you'll see up on the screen, but most of them you won't. I just brought them with me. And feel free to play with them, because that's what they're meant to be. Okay? So, we're going to talk about how Santa Claus evolved, changed. Maybe that's better than saying the aging of Santa. How about the changing of Santa? Because Christmas goes back over 2,000 years. And originally Christmas had all kinds of traditions because it was based on some very strange festivals like Mithra or Saturnalia. The Romans would have had Saturnalia. And they really didn't have a central character until about 300 in time. And that's when we first meet a gift giver. And we'll see if I can work this. By the way, before I click this, a couple of you were asking me about my collecting habits. That is the first Santa Claus that I acquired as a collector. We had family pieces, but that one I actually purchased, and I brought him home and wound him up, and he rings his bell and he rolls around. So that's what started it all at some point. But let's talk about St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas was a young man. He was the first recognized gift giver. He was good and caring, and he particularly is known for his generosity to children. So much so that he was given the job of being bishop of, I don't know how to pronounce that, whether it's Myra or Mira. It is today in Turkey. And so he traveled in order to go to different lands. And they named churches after him. In fact, there are more churches named St. Nicholas than any other saint being named. He died in 345 as a fairly young man. And let's see if I can do this. There we have him as the patron of children, because his generosity was mostly for the children. Notice the two different images of Saint Nick. I want you to remember this one on your right, because that image is important. Hold on. There it is. Does not want to move. There it is. There are a lot of legends about Saint Nick. The main one, the one that got him started, was there were 3 young women that lived in his town. And they were very poor. No dowries, which is what they had to have in order to attract a husband. So these 3 women were going to end up being ladies of the street. What did Saint Nick do? He systematically dropped off 3 bags of gold through a window or a door, one for each girl. And so she would then have a dowry and could get married. And her father was very grateful for that. That continues on today, because the tradition of having the 3 gold balls outside of a pawn shop go back to these 3 women receiving gold from Saint Nick. So he's also the patron saint of pawnbrokers. There's another legend about Saint Nick that he was in a town where there had been a murder, and a man brought his 3 sons. I don't know why it's always 3, but it is. To town. They had no place to stay. The boys stayed in the barn, and somebody went out and killed them. And Saint Nick is the one who went walking out and resurrected them. They had been chopped up, but he put them back together, and they lived. And so he's a patron saint of young boys. And then finally he traveled very, very far. And he was known to have calmed the seas in the middle of a major storm. And so he's the patron saint of sailors. This is a busy man. And as I said, he died actually at a fairly young age, but he happened to die on December 6th. And so today, people recognize him by hanging their stockings or putting their shoes out on the night of December 5th. Tonight, You need to hang your stocking. And Anne was telling me she has yet to get anything in her stocking. But who knows, if you truly, truly believe, St. Nick might just show up at your house and fill your stocking tonight. Okay? And then we have the naysayers. This is Martin Luther. And when the Protestant Reformation happened in the 1500s, they did not want Christmas. They thought it was frivolous. I'm having trouble saying that. And too much fun. So, they outlawed it. You were no longer able to recognize Christmas. And that came true here in America because the Puritans brought that idea with them to the States. Boo. Hiss. Luther lived in the 14 and 1500s. The Puritans were working mainly in the 1600s, and it was a very dark time for Christmas. So, what do you do about something like that? You come to America and you bring your old traditions with you. This happens to be an illustration by T.C. Boyd, and it came out of the whole idea of the Pennsylvania Dutch, because they actually remembered St. Nicholas. There were also people in New Amsterdam or New York, and they brought St. Nicholas with them. They were called the Knickerbockers. And the earliest members included Washington Irving. And he wrote Christmas stories. And in his Christmas stories, one of which was titled Knickerbocker History of New York State, he actually did talk about St. Nick. But it was always St. Nick at this point, not Santa Claus. There was another gentleman that nobody has ever heard of. His name was Charles Pintard, and he was also a member of the Knickerbockers. He was also the man who set up the New York Historical Society. And he loved St. Nicholas. So he would talk about St. Nick and do exhibits about St. Nick. And then came the biggest boost of anything. And it happened right over in Troy, New York. It was there that they published a poem in the Troy Sentinel. And it was called A Visit by St. Nicholas. We call it 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, because it's evolved over the years into that. but it is probably the most repeated poem in America. It's also the 200th anniversary of it this year, because it was 1823 when that poem was written by Clement Moore. It took him a long time to admit that he wrote it, by the way. And there are some questions about the authorship, but most people believe it was Clement Moore who wrote that. Nowhere in that poem does he mention Santa Claus. It's always Saint Nick. And the other thing that I find amazing, he names the reindeers. By the way, it's Dunder, not Donner. And it's Blixen, not Blitzen. But over the years, they've rewritten that poem many, many, many times. And so, let me see if I can do this. There we have the visit of St. Nicholas. And Damon was telling me they actually have an original copy over in Troy. Yeah. Okay. Over the years, different people have illustrated that poem. And one of the most best known was Thomas Nast. And this is one of his first images of Santa Claus, right up here, wearing stars and stripes. This was published in 1861, and so the Civil War was going on. And Nast was a political cartoonist. He is the person responsible for the Republican elephant and the Democrat donkey. He's the one who invented those. So he also started drawing Santa Claus in some of his columns. I keep losing the... There we go. And he's dressed all in fur and so lively and quick. Straight out of the poem. This is 1863, which is 40 years after that poem was first published. These are two more illustrations by Thomas Nast of the poem. Now, think back. Do you remember that image of Saint Nick that I had early on? This is almost the same style as we were seeing when people describe St. Nicholas. He's dressed all in fur. He has the white beard. And he progresses into the end of the century. I thought this was Spanish-American War. It's not. It's the Philippine-American War in 1899. And there's Santa with the war equipment. So, there's Thomas Nast toward the end of his career, And this is used in postcards and Christmas cards. It's used all over the place. But you can see Santa has now grown to be rather round. And he's delivering toys. And there's a whole set of discussions about the pipe. Because if you have a long pipe, you are more patrician. If you have a short pipe, you're plebeian. So this is saying that Santa is a good guy. Now, there were other illustrators. This is Arthur Rackham, who is best known for illustrating Through the Looking Glass. But he also did 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And I just ordered a copy of it over the internet, and instead they sent me 'Twas the Night Before Christmas by Grandma Moses. They sent the wrong book. And so I can't show you more than this one picture. Okay, now let's talk about Santa's character. Damon's out of the room, right? The original Santa was not necessarily a nice guy. He could be mean. He was a disciplinarian, and the whole concept of naughty or nice, he would carry switches. He had people that were with him that were, they would hand out the punishments. If you weren't good, you would get coal in your stocking. So that Santa had a much different character than what we're used to. Now, I'm having problems, but we can do this. This happens to be a papier-mâché Santa. And this was a family item. Don't tell on me, Mary. You ready? This is what was passed down in my family as an early Santa. Not a nice guy. Isn't he? Uh-huh. Well, when we want to talk about Halloween, we don't want to burn down the library. Santa would, at times, show up at Halloween. This was part of a full Santa costume. And so little kids would dress up as a mean Santa, and they'd be out on the streets. I don't know what they would do to get the treats. Maybe they, but it was a different era.
What time period was this from?
This is 1880s. And a lot of things, by the way, back then were made out of this very heavy-duty paper mache. Yeah. This was purchased in Germany, I think in Oberammergau. Let's say in the 21st century. So they're still carrying the image of the mean Santa. He does show up. Here is what is known as a Bellschnickel. And a Bellschnickel is somewhere between Santa, mean Santa, Father Christmas. And this is the only picture I took of an ornament. That also would be late 1800s. Over the years, it has lost its silvering. That would have, been a typical German ornament. Okay, 20th century. We have Norman Rockwell, and his first cover about Santa Claus didn't show Santa Claus, it showed someone playing Santa Claus. This would have been 1916. I'm having, there we go, more Rockwell. I think this is 1927, whoops. And the other one might be 1950s. So that Rockwell was doing Santa after Santa after Santa. And he's one of the people responsible for what we think of with Santa. Excuse me. There. Santa on the right. No, on the left. That's a Coca-Cola Santa. And it was a gentleman named Adam Sundblom who invented the Coca-Cola Santa. So again, they're coming closer and closer to our image of what Santa should look like. The other. Okay, here's Barbara the librarian talking. 1985 is when they came out with the book, Polar Express. And in it, it's a beautiful, beautiful story. Don't bother watching the movie. They have added all kinds of things. And the Santa Claus in the movie is gaunt and pushy. But the Santa in Polar Express, you can see him here. And let me walk over here for a minute. This is the Polar Express Santa. This came out in, I think it was first sold in Gimbels after the book came out. And he comes complete with his bell, which if you hear it, it means you believe. There's just something. I killed him. We can let him fly. Anyway, those are the changes of Santa Claus pretty much up to this date. This is 1985, yes. Since then, people have gone crazy with designing Santa Clauses. Sometimes they're really nice. It's borderline Father Christmas. Notice how he has his buddy if he needs to do any disciplinary action. This poor guy, if you look at him closely, it's like a sheen of wax over him. And the face looks like Albert Einstein. And yet that was made in Japan. This goes back to the tradition of Santa made out of batting, which was very, very common. About 1920. He could also be made out of pine cones. That one still has its 10-cent price tag on the bottom from being sold in a 5 and dime. The other two are made out of chenille. And that was fairly common, again, 1920s. And then there's plastic. And the plastic can actually be made into any form. So here you have Santa the skier and Santa just kind of standing there. We have lots of plastic over there, including the squeaky Santa. The one on the bench is a light-up Santa that you can put him outside. By the way, there is now back to having a Santa on the top of the fire hall. Santa and his sleigh. So we have a little wind-up one. Santa is celluloid, but and so is the reindeer. But the sleigh itself is metal. The other sleigh, the white one, made in Japan, out of cardboard covered with fabric. Or cast iron. This one will move, and the reindeer run and pull the sleigh, and Santa's arms will actually hold the reins. And then there's Anna Lee, who makes all kinds of Santas. By the way, He's not going to work today. This is a Gund, and when he was new, he would move along the table as you pulled out the base. Okay, another use for Santa, holding candy. And so, 19th century, candy holder and candy holder. There you have your plastic. By the way, each one of these is different. You'll notice these two have feet. Those two don't have eyes, etc., etc., etc. Whoever is dealing with Santa can do it any way they want. This is a puppet, and Mr. Rogers had a Santa on his show, and so they produced puppets that copied that. How about some games? We have a top, and the other Santa, you're supposed to catch the ball in his head. Gary can do it, but I can't. I've never been able to get it to land right. Roly-poly Santa. He makes lovely little noises. That's a plastic bank. So you push Santa down the chimney. And then there is an opening at the very top of the roof where the reindeer would land. And you put your coin in there, and Santa comes popping back up. Santa from different lands. What you see here, this one is right here, and that was acquired at a Christkindlmarkt in Germany. And it's made with walnuts and prunes. And every Christkindlmarkt carries those. The other little guy is Russian. Czech Republic. And the one that surprises me all the time, stop that. Come on. This one is Egyptian, which I find really odd. There's also a South American one over there. And Sue? That one's very, very local. And Sue gave it to me. Those are the two views of Santa going down the chimney. Made right here in Lee. Right? And then there's also Santa from galaxies far beyond. My son-in-law gave me this. So, The point is that Santa comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. Over the years, he has changed or not. And most people, when they think of Santa Claus, this one wants to come out. There we go. Santa can be played with. Let's hope that when you hang your stockings tonight, you don't get coal in them. It's something to be careful of. But in the meantime, the whole concept is to believe in the gift giver. He's the nice guy. So feel free to come up and play with any of the Santas that are here. And Merry Christmas. Than I should have. All right? Over the years, many people have given me Santas. And it's something that I have let people know now. Don't give me any more Santas. I have more than enough. In fact, I've reached the point where on any given year, not all of them come out. They take turns. So, any other questions?
Where and how do you store them through the year? Especially something like the paper mache, they must all be fragile.
Plastic bags inside of bins. There's usually fabric in there to kind of wrap around them. I also have a bookcase that some of the smaller ones live in. And then there is a display case in our dining room. And that has Santas in it. In fact, there's an entire band of Santas where they're all playing instruments. And that's in that one.
And that's year-round then?
Pardon?
And that's year-round then?
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun to get them out and decide which ones are coming out this year. So, I have a set of Staffordshire plates that were produced, where each plate is a Santa from a different country. And those are fun to, look at. And I use them for cookie plates. So.
Santa seemed like this evolved into Santa, right? Yet now, they're so different that sometimes we refer to St. Nicholas, when we refer to Santa, it's almost like they're two people.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just wondering, at what point did that happen, where Santa became so different that he's no longer St. Nicholas? Using Santa as opposed to saying St. Nicholas.
I think it came most likely when Europeans moved to America, and they were using phrases like Sinterklaas. They were referring to Saint Nick, they were drawing pictures of Saint Nick, but they were saying, finally, words that came close to Santa Claus. So that 1800s, let's say 1800, would be a time when that sort of thing would be happening.
And the idea that he comes down a chimney, that started in America. That wasn't going on.
The first illustrations that I've seen where he's coming down the chimney, in fact, a lot of the traditions go back to Moore's poem. Because that Santa, who is called St. Nicholas, came down the chimney.
I'm sorry, when St. Nicholas, where was he from?
St. Nicholas was in Turkey. Yeah. And just recently I ran across another reference to a very early gift giver in Egypt. But I haven't had a chance to hunt that one down. Someday. Yeah, Kathy.
You start with St. Nicholas, and then we go to Santa Claus. But in other countries, it never went to Santa Claus.
Right.
England is Father Christmas. I forget what France is, and they have different names in different countries that don't even translate to Santa Claus. So
Pure Noel
that's
in France.
Yeah.
I do think a lot of those grew out of that time period where Christmas was a no-no. And so they were coming up with gift givers that could kind of hedge around the laws. So there's what is it? There's a Father Christmas who is dressed entirely in white in the Russian provinces. And that was because, no, they couldn't have Santa Claus or Christmas. So they came up with this other creature. Befanta in Italy was a little old woman who was a gift giver. But I think most of the gift givers that showed up because people were getting around the rules. Saint Nick never died. Yeah, he continued on. He just kind of took on a disguise.
So Santa's not universal. I mean, it's
No.
very different in every country. And in a lot of countries, he's not heavy, right? Or is he jolly in both countries?
I don't know that I know enough to answer that question. Because more and more, where is it? There are skinny Santas.
Oh, it's still evolving.
Yeah, it constantly.
A healthier Santa.
Yeah.
So to piggyback on what you were saying about Coca-Cola, I've read that Coca-Cola had a huge influence on Santa as we see him today.
Oh, right.
Like, I don't know if he was as fat before Coca-Cola came out. I think they made him a little more jolly, and the advertising. I got from where I read it, they did a major influence on how we see Santa today.
There were images of jolly and fat Santas prior to the Coca-Cola Santa, but that seemed to embed it in our minds. Now, that wasn't until like 1940 where the Coca-Cola Santa came out. And by the way, they did do a Pepsi-Cola Santa. He was also fat and happy. But he didn't stick around and finally got replaced by a bunch of polar bears. Yeah.
Norman Rockwell's Pepsi-Cola Santa Claus. My mother made the Santa Claus outfit. Well, it was Mr. Sullivan with the meat market. And I have a picture of my mom after he had tried it on in their home. And some people argue with me. They say, no, it's Coca-Cola. No, that was
No.
Pepsi. And that was Norman Rockwell. And
Yeah.
Norman Rockwell wanted the fur on it to be real ermine. And my mother had a terrible time coming up with that.
Well, yeah.
Found a furrier in Pittsfield.
Wow. But no, the Pepsi one just never really grabbed the world like the Coca-Cola. Well, yes, but anything else about Santa that you would like to talk about?
Well, I don't know if anybody's seen the latest John Travolta Santa commercial where he's doing Saturday Night Fever. He's like coming
Oh,
out,
that,
it's hysterical.
yes, it is.
Really
It
well done.
is.
It's a great idea. I think it gives people a good feel.
And he's got the walk is the same walk that Travolta had in Saturday Night Fever. It's a wonderful.
He says to the girl in the store who was in the movie, he says, where have you been? And he says, in the North Pole. It's all connected with the movie. If you have a chance to see it. I think it's a Capital One commercial.
Oh, it's a wonderful commercial. I don't know when he bought a house at the North Pole. That's something I've never been able to kind of track down. Because the North Pole shows up in the I think it's the 1950s is when they came out with the cartoons for television. And there was Frosty the Snowman and the island of... Yes, okay. And they did one about the young boy who was Santa. And I think that might be where they introduced the North Pole, but I'm not sure. There's so much about this character that you could go off in, 14 different directions, looking at him and the changes over the years.
So the elves, though, started in America, right? That was an American story.
Rackman, Arthur Rackman had elves in his book, and that would be late 1800s into the early 20th century. But
So we assume that that these writers created and changed Christmas story when they wrote it. They would make a book and then they would add something and that would become part of the whole Christmas story.
yes, so that the book that got mailed to me, instead of the Arthur Rackham, the Grandma Moses, there are pictures in there that have nothing to do with anything. But it's her style. So, as we're talking about Santas, pick your style. Anyway, thank you all for coming and hanging in there.